Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Have you ever wondered why some skills seem to get harder to learn as you get older, while others just keep getting better? Or maybe you've noticed that as you get older, certain ways of thinking and learning seem to naturally group together. Well, this new study dives deep into how our thinking abilities, especially the ones we call fluid cognition, change as we grow up. This paper is all about charting the journey of our fluid cognition, or FC, from childhood all the way to young adulthood. Think of fluid cognition as your brain's ability to solve new problems, reason flexibly, and adapt to new situations. It is like your mental agility or your capacity for quick thinking. You know how kids are amazing at picking up new games and figuring things out on the fly? That is fluid cognition at its peak development. But what happens to it as we age? Does it improve at the same speed for all thinking skills? Or do some skills mature faster than others? And how do these different thinking skills even relate to each other as we get older? That is the big question these researchers set out to answer. So, what did they do? They looked at a pretty big group of people, over 1,000, ranging from 8 to 21 years old. This is a fantastic age range because it covers childhood, adolescence, and early adulthood, all key times for brain development. They used a set of standardized tests called the NIH Toolbox Cognition Battery. This is great because it means all the participants took the same test, making the results comparable. The tests measured things like how well people could control their impulses, switch between tasks, how quickly they could process information, remember things they just learned, and hold information in their minds while working on something else. These weren't just any participants. The study was designed to get a representative sample of young people in the United States. So it is a pretty solid group. They excluded people with certain medical conditions to keep the sample as focused on typical development as possible, and importantly, they got informed consent from adults and assent from minors. Now, let's talk about the tasks. They tested inhibitory control with the flanker task, where you have to identify the direction of a central arrow while ignoring surrounding arrows. For cognitive flexibility, they used the dimensional change card sort, or DCCs, where you have to sort cards by different rules like shape or color, and switch between those rules. Processing speed was measured by the pattern comparison task, where you quickly say if two images are the same. Episodic memory, which is remembering specific events, was tested with the picture sequence memory test, where you reorder images to match a story. And finally, working memory, the ability to hold and manipulate information, was assessed with the list sorting task. The first big thing they looked at was the pace of change for each of these thinking skills. They used a cool statistical method called generalized additive models, or GAMs. Think of GAMs as a flexible way to draw a smooth curve through data, capturing those wobbly, not so straight developmental lines. This is important because development isn't always linear. It has its ups and downs. It spurts and plateaus. And what did they find? Pretty much all these fluid cognition skills got better with age, and the improvements were steepest during childhood and early adolescence. This really confirms that adolescence is a time of significant brain development. For example, inhibitory control improved most steeply between ages 8 and about 15 and a half. Cognitive flexibility also showed rapid gains, though it had a couple of slightly different peaks. Processing speed continued to improve significantly up to almost 17 years old. Episodic memory and working memory also showed these steep increases during childhood and adolescence. Generally, they found that the most rapid improvements for all these skills happened before age 17. This aligns with the idea that the brain is really busy building and refining these higher-level thinking skills during these formative years. They also looked at how these skills compared to each other. While most improved steadily, they found some subtle differences. For instance, processing speed showed the steepest rate of change, meaning it improved the fastest compared to the other skills on average, while inhibitory control didn't show as distinct a divergence from the others. This tells us that even though these skills are all part of fluid cognition, they have their own unique developmental timelines. It's not just one big leap, it's a series of individual journeys. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Do these thinking skills all develop in isolation, or do they start to organize themselves into something like a cognitive architecture? To explore this, they used a technique called multidimensional scaling, or MDS. Imagine you have several dots on a piece of paper, and the distance between them shows how similar they are. MDS does this for the thinking skills. If two skills are very similar in how people perform them across ages, their dots will be close together. And here is what they found. Consistently across all age groups, the thinking skills seem to group into two main sub-architectures. One group included inhibitory control, cognitive flexibility, and processing speed. They've labeled this the cognitive control group. The other group included episodic memory and working memory, which they've called the memory group. This pattern was surprisingly stable. Even young children showed this bimodal organization. It suggests that from a pretty early age, our brains seem to be organizing these different cognitive abilities into these broader categories. But here is the twist. While the general organization into cognitive control and memory seemed stable, the way these two groups related to each other changed with age. They found that as people got older, especially through adolescence, the cognitive control and memory groups became more distinct. It is like they started out a bit intertwined and then gradually separated, becoming more specialized. They also looked at the growth of these two broader categories. Just like the individual skills, the cognitive control and memory factors both increased with age, with the steepest improvements happening between 8 and about 17 years old. However, there was still a slight difference in their developmental pace here too. Cognitive control showed a slightly steeper rate of change than memory. What does this all mean? It paints a picture of how our thinking skills develop over time. We see that fluid cognition isn't just one thing. It is a collection of skills that develop at different rates. The core ability to control our thoughts and switch between tasks, along with how fast we process information, seems to form one cluster, while our ability to remember and juggle information in our minds forms another. The fact that this organization existed even in childhood and persisted through adulthood is really telling. It suggests a fundamental architecture of fluid cognition that is present early on. But the increasing differentiation between the cognitive control and memory groups during adolescence is a key finding. It hints at the period of specialization, where these broader cognitive functions become more distinct. This could help explain why certain skills feel more challenging or easier at different life stages. It's like your brain is fine-tuning its different processing units. This study also highlights the importance of using sophisticated statistical methods, like the generalized additive models, to capture these nonlinear changes. Simply looking at averages can miss the crucial periods of rapid development. It underscores that adolescence is a critical period, not just for social and emotional changes, but for significant cognitive maturation as well. One interesting point is the comparison with other research. Some studies suggest a more unified view of executive functions, while others highlight distinct components. This study's findings suggest a middle ground. There is an overarching organization, but the individual components and their relationships do evolve. They also acknowledge the limitations of using just one task per cognitive process, which is a sign of good science. Future research could use a wider array of tasks to get an even more detailed picture. The real. So what here is how this understanding can inform education, parenting, and even how we think about cognitive decline later in life. Knowing that these skills develop at different paces and in distinct groups might help us create more targeted interventions or support systems for learning and cognitive development. For instance, if we know that cognitive control skills are still developing significantly into late adolescence, we can understand why certain complex tasks requiring impulse control or flexible thinking might still be challenging for teenagers. This research really emphasizes that our cognitive abilities are not static. They are dynamic, constantly evolving and organizing themselves. It's a beautiful illustration of how our brains are wired for growth and adaptation, especially during those formative years. So, what are my thoughts on this study? I think it's incredibly valuable. The use of a large, diverse sample and sophisticated statistical methods makes its findings robust. The clear identification of cognitive control and memory subarchitectures and their evolving relationship is a significant contribution to our understanding of cognitive development. It is a great example of how we're moving beyond simple measures of intelligence to understand the complex, interrelated systems that make up our minds. One limitation to keep in mind is that this is a cross-sectional study, meaning it looks at different people at different ages. While this gives us a great snapshot, longitudinal studies that follow the same individuals over time would provide even deeper insights into individual developmental trajectories. Also, as they mentioned, using more varied tasks could further refine these cognitive categories and their developmental patterns. But for now, this research gives us a fantastic roadmap for how our fluid thinking skills mature. It highlights the interconnectedness and the specialization that occurs over time. It's a story of a brain in progress, constantly building and rebuilding its architecture of thought. Thanks for joining me on RUBIN'S Mind Lab. If you enjoyed this breakdown, please give this video a thumbs up. Let me know in the comments what cognitive abilities you find most interesting. And don't forget to subscribe for more dives into the fascinating world of psychology and neuroscience. See you next time.